I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw materials. I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw materials. I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw materials. I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw materials. I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw materials.
Incroyable. Quelle belle journée. C'est incroyable. Monsieur le Premier ministre Legault, Madame la mairesse Martinez-Ferrada, félicitations pour votre élection. J'ai hâte de travailler avec vous pour renforcer notre partenariat. Et je suis très content que notre premier événement est si animé. Tous les maires, tous les députés de l'Assemblée nationale, de la Chambre des commerces, de Chambre des commerces, c'est pas des chambres de commerce, c'est preuve ici à mon expected detonation budget will meet the ambition of this project across Canada, unleashing $1 trillion of new investments over the next 5 years, including $50 billion in community infrastructure. I took the advice of the Premier Ministre. Community infrastructure, including hospitals, recreation centers, and public transit. Hier, J'ai annoncé notre deuxième tranche de projet d'intérêt national qui comprend la mine de Matawini, de la société Nouveau Monde Graphite dans l'anneau d'hier. Ce projet va s'intégrer à l'usine de matériaux de batterie de Bécancour afin de produire du stockage entièrement avec le tronçon de Mont. Parce que le projet d'intérêt du monde, il faut... Bruno Marchand est ici, et c'est le deuxième. C'est prêt, mais c'est le deuxième. OK. Et c'est un projet qui transforme notre pays. Et c'est aussi une infrastructure destinée à la communauté locale. On a tous les députés, tous les maires, tous les gens de toutes les communautés, et construit en partenariat avec le secteur privé. Once completed, the REM will be the largest automated transportation system in the world. And to support its first phase, the Canada Infrastructure Bank deployed over $1.2 billion in financing. The second phase of the REM, stretching from downtown to Deux Montagnes, expands, as Charles said, the service to nearly 50 kilometers, and 19 stations. Et le gouvernement du Canada investit 400 millions de dollars pour relier directement le terminal de l'aéroport du REM, de manière à permettre aux gens de se rendre de centre-ville à l'aéroport en seulement 25 minutes. Cette station sera mise en service en 2027. Mais, chers amis, il ne s'agit pas seulement de ce que nous construisons, mais de la façon dont nous le construisons. Et le projet de REM mise sur la solidarité avec les travailleurs, créant 34 000 emplois. 34 000 emplois durant la construction. Ouais. Merci. Il y aura 1000 emplois permanents et plus de 2 milliards de dollars en salaire une fois le réseau est pleinement opérationnel. Ce projet sera construit permettra de retirer fournisseurs de du réseau. Ce projet est un exemple du potentiel de notre travail motrice caisse. Pour mener ce et ce genre de pour le futur. Canada's government is focused on attracting massive investment into our country so our workers have more job options and higher wages. Our businesses have more opportunities and our communities are more affordable and more connected. We're moving ahead with major nation-building projects that will directly benefit our workers, our businesses, and our communities in Montreal and across Quebec. We're fast-tracking. We take the example. We're fast-tracking high-speed rail spanning 1,000 kilometers from Toronto to Montreal and Quebec City, reaching speeds of up to 300 kilometers an hour. This will create 50,000 jobs during constructions, injecting $35 billion into our economy. And as we diversify our trade, we need our export terminals and our ports for our businesses to reach new markets. And that's why we're working with the Port of Montreal to develop Contrecoeur avec la province du Québec. This will create 5,000 jobs during construction, 1,000 permanent jobs during operations, generate hundreds of millions of commercial value every year. Mes amis, face aux changements mondiaux, les Canadiens, les Canadiennes, les Québécoises et les Québécoises choisissent de bâtir des communautés plus grandes et plus fortes que jamais. Nous bâtissons de Montagne, nous bâtissons Montréal, nous bâtissons le Québec et nous bâtissons un Canada fort. Merci beaucoup et félicitations à tous.
Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Merci.
I guess I saw There was a certain smugness. You'd be able to hear the old saying,
J'invite maintenant le
you can
premier
always
ministre du
tell a
Québec.
Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and
Au cours des
I
derniers
would
mois,
sometimes argue with him, getting him out on the limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, "Did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people?" And I said, "Don't give me too much credit. I had good raw material." I guess I saw. There was a certain smugness. You'll be able to hear the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And
merci beaucoup, Isabelle,
I remember
cette introduction. Et tout d'abord, je voudrais vous assurer, je ne prolongerai jamais la crise afin de rester comme Premier ministre du Canada. OK. Probablement pas. Alors, merci à la Chambre de commerce de Montréal de m'accueillir et de nous rassembler aujourd'hui. Quelle salle ici. C'est incroyable. Quel plaisir, quel honneur. C'est une salle d'action. C'est une salle d'action. Et je suis heureux de me retrouver à Montréal pour aborder notre plan pour un Canada fort. Je sais que les Québécois et les Québécoises à la fichère des rentiers comme simple, Lightspeed et plus grade. Les entrepreneurs d'ici ont incité nos universités à penser différemment en fondant MILA, la plus importante concentration des chercheurs universitaires en apprentissage profond à l'échelle mondiale. Et on a besoin de tout cela. Parce que l'histoire des nations est ponctuée des moments où l'avenir est incertain et où nous actuellement le monde économique entre le Canada et Brian Mulroney passé qui et non économique. That's why, in that spirit, that context was what we took into tabling our first budget as Canada's new government. We estimated in that budget that U.S. tariffs and the uncertainty that they're causing will cost Canadians around 1.8% of our GDP. You translate that. That's about $50 billion lost from our economy, the equivalent of $1,300 for every woman, man, and child in this country. And if we don't act now, these losses will only grow. Nostalgia is not a strategy. The United States has changed. That's their right. We must respond. That is our imperative. And the budget builds Canada strong by focusing on what we can control. First and foremost, building at home to protect and empower Canadians. And let me stop here for a second. I had the privilege before I came here to do what every politician dreams, to take credit for something that other people had done. It's fantastic. Wasn't it fun, Madame la Mairesse? Vous étiez là encore. But this is to realize the vision of Philippe Couillard, Michael Sabia, executed and brought to fruition by Charles Lemont, François Legault, by Alstom, by Pulsar, Atkins Realis, by the people of this great city, the latest spur, and this is understating the tronçon de Rem, which brings communities together, which builds this great city and shows the way to the future. So building at home, bringing us together, that empowers the Montrealais, that empowers Canadian. The second aspect that we have to do and we're focused on is boosting our productivity to drive lasting prosperity. We're transforming how government works for you. And we're diversifying our trade partners abroad to create more opportunity and greater independence. Overall, we estimate that this plan will unleash, or has the potential to unleash, over $1 trillion in investment over the next 5 years in Canada. And that alone will increase our GDP by over 3.5%. Translated, $3,500 for every Canadian worker, twice what the Americans are taking from us. Le budget 2025 est la nouvelle stratégie économique dont le Canada a besoin pour relever ce défi et en sortir plus fort. Un Canada confiant qui prend son avenir en main. Pour y arriver, on doit s'attaquer aux pressions économiques de longue date. I'll highlight a few elements of this strategy before the conversation with Isabelle. As I said a moment ago, we're starting at home with generational investments. We're creating the right conditions to get big things built in Canada. Infrastructure that connects our country, not just our city. Infrastructure like Alto, the high-speed rail that will cut travel time in half between Quebec City and Toronto. Although why anyone would not just stop in Montreal on that trip is the other question. In June, just in June, we passed the One Canadian Economy Act to remove federal barriers to internal trade and to fast-track approvals of nation-building projects. In August, we opened the Major Projects Office as a single point of contact to get nation-building projects built faster. These are projects that will connect, diversify, and propel forward our economy. Projects that will help us expand our exports to new partners. Projects that will create hundreds of thousands of good-paying union jobs for Canadian workers. Combinés aux 5 premiers projets, tout ça représente un total de 115 milliards de dollars d'investissement dans l'énergie nucléaire, le GNL, le captage de carbone, les minéraux critiques et les nouveaux corridors commerciaux. Ces investissements touchent toutes les régions du Canada et contribuent à la croissance de chacune d'entre elles. Hier, nous avons annoncé la deuxième tranche du projet. Cela inclut le projet de mine graphite de Matawini dans l'Arrondière par l'entreprise Nouveau Monde Graphite. Cette mine va aider à mener notre transition vers les technologies propres. Elle produit du graphite sphérique qui est essentiel pour les batteries de véhicules électriques et les systèmes de stockage d'énergie. But that project is part of a bigger strategy on critical minerals. All of the projects that we're doing are part of bigger strategies that include high-speed rail, clean energy, sovereign data, strategies that will build a better connected, more sustainable, and more productive Canadian economy. It was mentioned in the introduction. Our new defense industrial strategy will leverage over $80 billion increase in defense spending over the next 5 years to build Canadian industry, including in AI, in cyber, in space, in quantum, and other dual-use technologies, including right here in Montreal and Longueuil. Et puis Laval, si c'est possible. Notre stratégie de compétitivité climatique va contribuer à générer des centaines de milliards de dollars d'investissement dans les infrastructures hydroélectriques, nucléaires, de stockage et de réseaux électriques pour positionner le Canada comme leader de l'économie à faible émission de carbone. Cette stratégie a 3 piliers principaux. Premièrement, renforcer la tarification du carbone pour l'industrie au Canada pour offrir de la certitude à long terme aux entreprises et investisseurs. Deuxièmement, élargir les crédits d'impôt pour l'économie propre pour rendre la transition vers l'énergie propre plus abordable pour les industries canadiennes. Et troisièmement, c'est un peu spécialisé, mais troisièmement, finaliser la réglementation renforcée sur le méthane dans le secteur pétrolier et gazier. Mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais faire un point fondamental. Dans une période d'incertitude, pour bâtir l'avenir, il faut investir dans nos forces. Et au Canada, surtout au Québec, l'électricité a toujours été une force. La bonne nouvelle, nous sommes dans une ère mondiale d'électrification. La demande explose. Pour charger nos véhicules, chauffer nos maisons, développer nos industries et alimenter nos centres de données d'intelligence artificielle, le Canada va plus que doubler sa capacité électrique d'ici 2050. C'est un grand défi, mais c'est essentiel. Pourquoi? Parce que l'électricité propre va protéger notre environnement et renforcer notre souveraineté. Et surtout, c'est la base sur laquelle nous allons bâtir notre avenir économique. L'accès à de l'énergie propre, fiable et abordable va aussi permettre à nos entreprises de réaliser deux grands projets d'investissement dans les minéraux critiques, l'aluminium, le fer, l'acier. Des projets qui vont créer des milliers d'emplois. Mieux que n'importe qui, les Québécois et Québécoises comprennent que l'électricité peut forger une économie. Le Québec moderne a été bâti par des visionnaires qui ont misé sur l'électrification. Aujourd'hui, le Québec se tourne à nouveau vers ces grands bâtisseurs avec des projets qu'on entend avec Terre-Neuve et Labrador. Et le gouvernement fédéral aussi va jouer son rôle. Le budget prévoit des incentives pour l'électricité propre et le Bureau de grands projets va accélérer des projets qui vont faire du Canada une superpuissance énergétique propre. Nous sommes déjà en action. Hier, j'ai annoncé un corridor énergétique en Colombie-Britannique qui va ouvrir la porte à des projets de minéraux critiques. Et c'est avec ce niveau d'ambition que nous allons sortir gagnants. En plus d'avoir des ambitions globales, nous allons aussi construire des infrastructures locales, de nouveaux hôpitaux, de transports en commun, des installations récréatives, des centres artistiques, grâce au fonds pour les collectivités fortes, doté de 50 milliards de dollars dans le budget. Ce fonds aidera les provinces, les territoires, les municipalités à construire les infrastructures dont ils ont besoin pour bâtir des collectivités fortes. Un Canada fort, ça veut dire un Montréal fort, un Québec fort. And as each of the mayors reminded me, building strong begins with housing. So new entity, Build Canada Homes, will work with municipalities to help double the pace of housing construction over the next decade, using new factory technologies, cutting building times by 50%, reducing costs by 20%, lowering emissions by 20%. Nous élargirons nos horizons à l'étranger, tout en construisant chez nous. Nous établissons de nouvelles relations commerciales avec des partenaires fiables pour doubler nos exportations hors des États-Unis au cours de la prochaine décennie. Ça représente 300 milliards de dollars de nouvelles commandes pour les ressources, les technologies et l'expertise canadienne. de nouveaux emplois pour les travailleurs canadiens. Au cours des derniers mois, nous avons signé un accord de libre-échange historique avec l'Indonésie. Nous avons conclu des accords avec les Émirats arabes unis pour l'intelligence artificielle, avec l'Union européenne pour la défense et avec l'Allemagne pour les minéraux critiques. Le mois dernier, nous avons entamé des négociations de libre-échange avec les Philippines et la Thaïlande, que nous espérons conclure au cours de la prochaine année. Parallèlement à un nouvel accord de libre-échange avec les pays de l'ANAS, qui représentent 20% du PIB mondial. Nous réengageons aussi le dialogue avec les géants mondiaux que sont l'Inde et la Chine. Next week, I will be in Abu Dhabi to further expand Canada's UAE economic partnership, and at the G20's Leaders Summit in Johannesburg, with the intention to deepen our partnerships with global giants in energy and trade, AI, and defense. I hope you have a sense that the momentum is building. But I want to assure you that we have a realization that we have to do much more to improve our productivity, which has lagged the G7 over the past decade. To help turn that around, we are boosting Canada's investment tax advantage. In particular, the budget introduces a productivity super deduction to reinforce our position as the most tax-competitive country in the G7 for new business investment. The super deduction allows immediate expensing, 100% write-off for a range of assets, including manufacturing equipment, machinery, buildings, clean energy generations, patents, data infrastructure, computers, capital expenditures for research and development. And if you have any issues with the scope, please see Michael Sabia at the break. Don't tell Champagne, though, that we don't. He's traveling somewhere. We are expanding investment tax credits for clean energy investment and for clean electricity by public utilities like Hydro-Quebec, as well as a range of critical minerals. And an important point is that these investment tax credits come on top of the super deduction. They are additive, not alternatives. These measures reduce Canada's marginal effective tax rate by more than 2 percentage points to 13%. This is substantially lower than the U.S. rate, even after the one big beautiful bill, so-called. The U.S. rate at 17.6%. Our rate of 13 is just a little above half of the G7 average of 25%. But it's not all about tax. Some people, it's all about tax in this room, but it's not all about tax. It's about talent. In addition to tax competitiveness, we have to add talent attractiveness. Le Canada et le Québec a toujours accueilli des gens du monde entier qui sont chefs de file dans leur domaine. Le budget 2025 déclenche notre stratégie d'attraction des talents internationaux dotée d'une somme de 1,7 milliard de dollars pour recruter plus d'un millier de chercheurs parmi les plus qualifiés au monde. Pour augmenter le nombre d'immigrants économiques et pour attirer les talentueux titulaires de visa H-1B American. Productivity is also about competition, because when businesses face greater competition, they work harder, they innovate faster, they serve their customers better. Canadians benefit from lower prices, higher quality products, and greater choice. And that's why Budget 2025 will boost competition and innovation in the telecoms industry by making it easier for Canadians to switch between internet, home phone, and cell phone plans. And it's why we will advance open banking to give consumers more control of their banking data and more options for their money. Ces mesures augmenteront la productivité et diminueront les coûts pour la population canadienne. Finalement, nous transformons le gouvernement pour le rendre plus efficace et efficient. Nous allons dépenser moins pour investir plus, ou plus correct, afin que les Canadiens et Canadiennes peuvent investir plus. Le budget introduit un nouveau cadre budgétaire qui distingue les dépenses opérationnelles à court terme des investissements en capital à long terme qui renforcent notre économie. So we go from a decade in which federal spending grew at more than 8% year after year after year, twice the rate of growth of our economy. We will slash direct program spending to 0.5% annually over the next 5 years. We'll balance the operating deficit in 3 years. We're reducing the size of the public service by 10%. We are cutting management consultants by 20%. These are a series of tough but responsible choices that will save Canadian taxpayers a total of $60 billion by restructuring operations, consolidating internal services, and right-sizing programs. Parallèlement, la part des investissements en capital dans les dépenses totales va plus que doubler, passant de sa moyenne historique de 4% à près de 9%. Ça représente plus de 450 milliards de dollars d'investissement en capital sur 5 ans, d'attirer les investissements privés dont le Canada a besoin. Il n'est pas seulement question de ce que nous bâtissons, mais aussi de comment nous bâtissons. Nous bâtirons de manière inclusive, en partenariat avec les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis. Nous bâtirons en solidarité avec les travailleurs en créant de bons emplois. Les prochaines décennies seront une période propice pour les travailleurs dans les métiers spécialisés. Et nous bâtissons de manière durable en mettant l'accent sur l'énergie à faible émission, les transports, le logement et le manufacturier pour renforcer notre compétitivité. Car la réduction des émissions n'est pas seulement un devoir moral, c'est aussi un impératif économique. Et par-dessus tout, nous bâtirons en achetant canadien. Nous serons notre meilleur client grâce à notre nouvelle politique d'achat canadien. Lorsque le gouvernement dépensera en priorité, nous allons sélectionner des fournisseurs canadiens. Acheter canadien donne à nos industries et à nos travailleurs les moyens de contribuer à transformer notre économie en une économie résiliente afin de bâtir un Canada fort. Il ne suffit pas seulement d'acheter canadien. Il faut aussi créer canadien. Et c'est primordial d'assurer un soutien financier à notre secteur culturel. Nous renforçons les arts et la culture canadienne et la culture québécoise grâce à un soutien de plus de 750 millions de dollars pour Téléfilm Canada, pour Radio-Canada, l'ONF, la Biosphère de Montréal. On parle ici de soutien pour notre cinéma, pour notre télévision, pour nos artistes, nos musiciens, pour nos festivals, pour notre joie de vivre, ici, surtout à Montréal. I'm almost finished. The budget makes responsible choices to right-size government, not least so we can protect the essential social programs that give every Canadian a fair chance to get ahead, including childcare, dental care, pharmacare, the National School Food Program, as well as the health, education, and social transfers on which the Minister of Finance and the provinces and the territories rely. Pour conclure, il y a deux réponses potentielles face aux doigts de douane américaine. Nous pouvons rester accrochés à des plans qui ont été dessinés pour un monde qui n'existe plus. Ou en faire de nouveau, faire pour un Canada confiant qui va prospérer dans ce nouveau monde. Oui, il y a un choix, il y a une option. Nous pouvons nous cacher, couper le déficit, nous renfermer. Mais ça voudrait dire se débarrasser de programmes sociaux, éliminer les transferts provinciaux et territoriaux pour la santé, l'éducation et les services sociaux et refuser d'investir pour répondre aux besoins actuels. Nous choisissons l'autre voie. Nous prenons des risques. Il faut prendre des risques. Nous prenons des risques et investir avec ambition dans notre avenir, comme les Canadiens et Canadiennes l'ont fait dans le passé. Parce que notre histoire est pleine d'aventuriers, de preneurs de risques et de bâtisseurs. Notre pays a été forgé par les peuples autochtones et les voyageurs qui ont cartographié le continent, bâti de vastes réseaux d'échanges commerciaux d'une océan à l'autre avant même que les Américains n'aient quitté Saint-Louis. Avec la fin de la guerre seconde mondiale, les Canadiens et Canadiennes se sont unis dans l'objectif de bâtir de grandes choses. De nouveaux quartiers pour loger des centaines de milliers de vétérans, anciens combattants, retournant de front. De nouvelles universités pour lancer de nouvelles carrières. La voie maritime de Saint-Laurent, l'autoroute transcanadienne, l'Expo 67. Autrefois, nous explorions notre pays. Encore une fois, nous allons tracer de nouvelles voies. Autrefois, nous bâtissions. Encore une fois, nous allons faire de grands travaux, bâtir vite, bâtir avec ambition. Autrefois, dans ce pays, nous prenions des risques. Encore une fois, comme cette salle, nous allons passer à l'action. Ensemble, nous choisissons le Canada. C'est notre pays. C'est votre avenir. Avec le budget, nous reprenons le contrôle. Bâtir un Canada fort. Merci et vive le Canada.
I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw material. I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness.
Thank you very much, Madam President.
You may have heard the old saying.
I must say that your comments and your introduction make it much easier for me to introduce the report of the Economic and Social Council for the 2025 session. The report, which is available to all of you, in addition to the document which we distributed right after the conclusion of our collective term as a Bureau in the end of July, provides a very good overview of the Council's work, including a range of sustainable development issues. If I may, Madam President, I'd like to take some time to extend my thanks to our excellent Bureau during this session. The Ambassador from Costa Rica, who I know is here, the Ambassador from Nepal, the Ambassador from Poland, and the Ambassador from Equatorial Guinea. We became good friends during this year, which was a very active one. We spent some time listening and learning from each other, and it was a completely enjoyable experience. I'd also like to extend my personal thanks to the teams at the Secretariat, particularly at UNDESA and DJACM, for their invaluable support to me personally and to the Council at large and to the members of the Bureau. Also, I think, although the people who helped me prepare these notes did not mention it, it would only be appropriate if I thank my own team at the Mission of Canada, some of them are sitting in the group there, and I want to just express my strong thanks to them for the great work that they did in allowing us to have such a fruitful and busy year. Just to go over a bit of the rhythm of the year, as you know, ECOSOC is elected in July, but our real sessions don't get really underway until the new year. This is the part of the calendar that is taken over by the General Assembly, so we're a little less busy in the fall, but we really get busy in January, and it takes us right through to the end of July. And I know Ambassador Thapa is going to be looking forward to the full blast of that schedule, which is a fascinating one. Let me also say that we had very important milestones, such as the Summit of the Future, the 4th Financing for Development Conference. We marked 10 years of SDG implementation. We hosted the most strongly attended youth forum held to date. And we had the UN Science, Technology, and Innovation STI Week was launched very successfully around the STI Forum this year, and I know that's something that's going to continue into future years. Just to give a few themes that were particularly important to us, the first one was this fundamental question that the UN's work on the economic and social issues of our time need to be much more closely linked in an integral way with the work of the international financial institutions in Washington. When the Bretton Woods were established, they were established at a parallel moment to the establishment of the UN. It was in 1944 and 1945 that these organizations were created. And we need to understand that we each have our jobs, but it not make any sense for us to be doing our jobs completely separately from each other. We have to connect. And so we've made every effort to connect with the IFIs, with the World Bank, the IMF, and the regional development banks. And that continues to be a priority and has to be a priority for all of us. We had a very successful biennial summit this year, and that was, I think, an expression of the amount of work that really went into building these relationships. We also carried on the work that was started by my predecessor, the ambassador from Chile, looking at AI as a permanent feature of the work of the Economic and Social Council, that we build a discussion about AI and the implementation of AI throughout the UN system as a key part of what we do. And that also meant advancing the SDGs, having some very successful meetings that we've had with the VNRs that have been very positive, and that's all been very good. We've had a chance to do some other things that I think have been important. And you yourself mentioned these, Madam President, in your very helpful report. Forced displacement and refugee issues. We have more people being displaced from home than ever before. We have over 140 million people who are now displaced around the world, and this puts tremendous strain on the humanitarian system, but it also puts strain on issues like migration and education, just to mention two that are key. We continued our focus on Haiti, Canada has the honor of serving as the chair of the Advisory Committee on Haiti to ECOSOC, so we spent a great deal of time focusing on that question. We also dedicated ourselves to engaging civil society. There is a view in this hall that the United Nations is only an organization of nation states, and that civil society has no right to a place in the discussions that go on here. That was false in 1945. We would not have had the kind of charter that we have if it were not for the participation of civil society in the months leading up to San Francisco and in the San Francisco meeting. And ECOSOC is the key door in which civil society can enter and engage with us. And so it's exceptionally important that we continue to do that. I notice, Madam Chair, that next year, in January, we will be celebrating our 80th anniversary. And I think we all need to take this opportunity to think about how we can strengthen ECOSOC further. There will be an upcoming review of both ECOSOC and the high-level political forum, and we would like all member states to be actively engaged. If you will permit me, Madam President, and I'm not sure there's much you can do to stop me at this point, I'm going to conclude by just making a few personal comments. Some of you will know that I'm stepping down as the Ambassador of Canada in a few days, actually 48 hours, and this will be my last opportunity from the dais to say a few things that I would like to say very much in connection with the work of ECOSOC. The first one, Madam President, you yourself have said, and I want to say it again, this is the Charter of the United Nations. I bring it to the meetings. Some of you will remember, have been around for a while. I often talk about the Charter. There is a lie going around that says that the core issue for the UN is only peace and security, and that everything else is just extra and a frill and doesn't really belong in the work of the UN. That idea is completely false. It's false as a matter of fact. That is to say, economic and social issues have always been part and parcel of the work of the UN, completely integrated into the Charter. ECOSOC is a charter body created in 1945, but it's also untrue for another reason that you, Madam President, have referred to, and that is you cannot get to peace and security if you ignore the economic and social and human rights and rule of law issues which are critical for the work of the United Nations. Human rights are not a frill. Social development is not a frill. Economic growth is not a frill. Tackling poverty and inequality, these are not frills. And most important in our current era, climate change, while not mentioned in the Charter, remains a critical problem for the future of the world, and not just the future, for the present. The second point I want to make is that UN 80 is an opportunity, not just a crisis. In fact, you could argue every crisis is an opportunity. And without crises, sometimes we wouldn't necessarily take advantage of the need to embrace change. But in embracing change, we need to understand that part of the fundamental problem that we face is one that has been created by member states themselves in failing to pay their dues to support the United Nations. In Canada, we have a concept that we call deadbeat dads. What are deadbeat dads? Deadbeat dads are dads that don't pay support payments to their spouses and children. And we have to spend a lot of time as governments in Canada tracking people down and saying, do you know how much money you owe to your family? Do you know how badly off your family is because you're not paying your dues? You're not paying what the court has ordered you to pay? When we all signed up for the charter, we signed up to pay our dues. We signed up not only to say these are nice words, but to say we will be there in order to pay for the work of the United Nations and in order to pay to what are called assessed contributions. And we have to keep on paying for assessed contributions. We can't ignore the importance of assessed contributions. Thomas Paine wrote in The Crisis in 1776, a great American Democrat. He pointed out that in a time of crisis, the last thing we need are summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. The UN is in a moment of crisis, and we don't need summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. We need countries that are going to be all in. Doesn't mean you have to be all in to say everything's wonderful or that we agree with everything the UN is doing. It means in order to make change, we all have to be contributors to change. But we can't go on with a situation where we're not paying attention to the need for actual contributions and actual participation, and not saying, the UN, as the Secretary General has pointed out, and he's absolutely right, UN is not a cafeteria. You don't walk in and say, I like this, but I don't like that. I like this peacekeeping mission, but I don't like that peacekeeping mission. I'll pay for this, but I won't pay for that. These are core values of citizenship. We don't pay our taxes and say, well, I don't want to pay for this because I don't agree with it. No, you pay your taxes. You pay your dues. And we have to create a culture in this organization where we recognize that paying up and paying in and contributing are actually core to what we do. And that's what allows us to make the reforms that will really matter. Yes. Are there too many resolutions that go on and on? Yes. Is there too much duplication in the UN? Yes. Is there even waste in the UN? Yes. But we can't create the framework to actually make the changes unless we're all in, unless we're contributing at every step of the way. The third point I want to make, Madam Chair, is simply to say this. The truth matters. Truth is real. Some things are true and some things are not true. Some things are information, some things are misinformation. Some things are facts, some things are lies. And I've tried to make a point from this podium and in other statements and ways of acting in this assembly to say we should not be afraid to tell things as they are and to be as clear as we can in expressing our differences respectfully, in a mode of civility, but at least having the courage to say these things have to be said. Climate change is real. Human rights are important. Getting away with things, impunity, is a bad thing. Corruption is a bad thing. Criminal gangs are bad things. Terrorism is a bad thing. There are good things and there are bad things. And that's why we need structures of law and structures of enforcement that help make things better. My last point is about courage. Courage is such an important virtue because it's the one virtue that makes the others possible. Courage can be difficult. It means stepping out. It means standing up. It means trying to persuade people who don't agree with you. But the thing we know about courage is that it is infectious. If some stand up, then others will stand up. And that's why it's so critical for us to truly appreciate the importance and the value of courage. Finally, Madam President, and just to say this by way of conclusion, I have so deeply appreciated the opportunity to work with everyone in this hall and to work with all members of the Secretariat and others. It's been a great honor for me to do this over the last 5.5 years. I have deeply appreciated it. Now, my life has been one of exits and entrances, of coming and going. I've had difficulty keeping a job, and so it's one that's been a feature of my life. Upon leaving both the Legislative Assembly of Ontario and leaving the House of Commons in Canada, I ended those two speeches with a quotation from William Shakespeare. And so I checked with my spouse if it was okay to do it again. She said, yeah, I think they'll let you get away with it one more time. So I'm going to read to you Sonnet 25, which is one of my favorites. And this is what it says. Let those who are in favor with their stars of public honor and proud titles boast, whilst I, whom fortune of such triumph bars, unlooked for joy in that I honor most. Great princes' favorites their fair leaves spread, but as the marigold at the sun's eye, and in themselves their pride lies buried. For at a frown they in their glory die. The painful warrior, famous for fight, after 1,000 victories once foiled, is from the book of honor raised quite, and all the rest forgot for which he toiled. Then happy I, that love and am beloved, where I may not remove nor be removed. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Madam President, for this opportunity.
I guess I saw there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw materials.
Le déficit et le budget augmenté.
I guess I saw...
Et on va le faire en coupant la... You want it, you work for it, and you can...
smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much.
I was raised by a couple of school teachers, and you know, one of my memories of that time, I remember in the 80s and the 90s, is that
I'd run into...
though we didn't have a ton of money, and we went through hard times like everyone did, particularly in the early 80s, we always had enough for meat and potatoes on the dinner table. We had a nice house in the suburbs with our own yard. Our own dog. I was even able to, my folks were able to save up enough to get me registered for hockey in my early, late, around 12 or 13 years old, a little late, too late to make the NHL, but so I had to settle for politics. But the great thing was, above and beyond all of the particulars of our material existence, was the promise for the future, the hope. My folks always told me, you want it, you work for it, and you can have it. That's the great thing about Canada. If you work hard, you get a great life. And I think my friends Jasraj Singh Halan, Delwinder Gill, Pat Kelly, Amanpreet Gill, David McKenzie, all have similar stories from their childhoods in this area. And I know, for example, Jazz grew up here, I think you were, was it Bowness? Or?
It was in the Northeast, in Whitehorn.
Whitehorn, and grew up modest means, but was able to get a great education, start his own business, build homes, and have a great career, and now is the pride of his entire community. And I think every one of these MPs can share the same story. That was the deal in Canada, but that deal is broken after 10 years of liberal inflation. They've doubled housing costs, doubled lineups at food banks, and what do you know? That coincided with them doubling the national debt. When you borrow and print money, you drive up the cost of everything and destroy the working class. Now, for the first time in the history of Canada, our young people cannot afford homes. We have an entire generation of youth who believe they will never be able to afford a place to live. Food bank lineups are up to 2.2 million. CBC was trying to comfort us just yesterday with a news story saying, hey, good news, you can get more affordable food if you go to this special shopping mart where they sell you food that's past the best before date. So now you can buy rotten food, and and you'll be able to afford it. So that is the CBC's solution to liberal food price inflation, which gets worse and worse every single day. Now 20% of Canadians are skipping bills because they have to put the money to higher grocery costs. This is the unnecessary result of liberal policies. And before we go blaming some exterior factor, let's be clear. Food prices in Canada are rising 50% faster than in the United States. We are the only country, according to the food professor, that has had 4 consecutive quarters of food prices rising faster than the Bank of Canada's target. This after Mark Carney promised that he would be judged by the prices at the grocery store. Well, so much for that promise. He's broken every single promise he made. He promised the fastest growing economy in the G7. He's delivered the fastest shrinking economy. He promised that he would negotiate a win and a deal with Trump by July 21st. Still no win, still no deal, still no elbows, still no jobs. He promised to double home building. Home building is expected to drop by 13%. He promised that we would develop our resources and increase investment. According to his own budget documents, investment has dropped in every one of the quarters since he became Prime Minister 8 months ago. He promised that he would spend less. And of course, that is the biggest broken promise at all. We now see Carney's costly credit card budget. He doubles Trudeau's deficit. You know, it's almost unthinkable. No one thought anyone could spend more money than Justin Trudeau. But Mark Carney said, hold my beer. And he came along with a deficit that is twice the size of the one that Justin Trudeau left behind. A deficit of $78 billion is the biggest in history outside of COVID, $16 billion bigger than Carney promised during the election. It is almost all due to increased spending, not due to tariffs from abroad. In fact, Mr. Carney has brought in $150 billion of new spending, and offset by the promised savings that he says he will achieve over the next 5 years, it's a net increase of $90 billion. Almost all of it is on operating expenditures, not on capital investments. This is with a doubling deficit, the biggest non-COVID deficit in Canadian history. Mark Carney has introduced a credit card budget that will drive up your cost of food, housing, and fuel. And that is why Conservatives unanimously oppose it. Furthermore, the costly Carney credit card budget will also increase taxes on farmers, food, and home building. So you've got an industrial carbon tax, which the budget proposes to raise. Well, that applies. I was just in Stettler yesterday and saw all the steel that goes into farming on the tractors, the combines, the bins, the barns. All of that will become more expensive because of Carney's carbon tax, which he promises to more than double in this budget. Carney's industrial carbon tax on farmers is a tax on your food. That same carbon tax will apply to steel, aluminum, glass, concrete, cement, and other home building supplies. I have a former home builder here in Jazraj Halan, and he can tell you that when you tax the things that go into homes, you tax homes. The industrial carbon tax of Mark Carney is a tax on homes, a tax on food and homes. Why don't you tell us what that will mean to the cost of a new home, Jazz?
Thanks, Leader. After 10 years of this Liberal government, home ownership is unattainable. You can ask any of the young Canadians, where a majority of them have just given up on home ownership altogether. This country used to be a place where certainly my family, when we moved here, and subsequent years after that, even as a home builder, until the Liberals took over, one income could get you a good living. You would be able to scrap money together and save up for a down payment. But after 10 years of the Liberals, all of that is gone. That Canadian dream of being able to owning a home, raising a family, it's all gone. And it's because the cost of everything has just skyrocketed, and this budget does nothing for home building that's going to improve it. As the Leader said, by introducing this industrial carbon tax from before and promising to raise the price on that, the more input costs into the home building is only going to make things worse. On top of all that, this is the same Liberal government that spent about $90 billion they committed to home building only to double home costs, housing costs. And now they're creating a fourth bureaucracy. The first three got us to this point. It's unfathomable that they would create a fourth bureaucracy to make home building slow down even worse. In fact, their own housing agency has said that home building starts are going to decrease this year and next year. And that is scary because that Canadian dream that everyone wants to be able to own a home is going to be unattainable. As a former home builder, we need to get the bureaucracy out of the way. We need to lower the government costs and make sure that builders are able to build, buyers are able to buy. But today, under the Liberals, after 10 years, builders can't build, buyers can't buy, and sellers can't sell. Only a Conservative government under Pierre Poilievre will fire those gatekeepers and make sure home building is attainable so we can bring back that Canadian dream where Canada is affordable and safe once again.
There you go. Thank you. And if you don't believe Jazz and I, then listen to the Home Building Association itself, Build, B-I-L-T, out of Toronto. They quote, I'm quoting them to say, what was once a promise to deliver 500,000 new homes annually has now become a plan that will cost 100,000 jobs. Canadians are now facing the prospect of a worsening crisis that will impact housing supply, employment, economic activity, and ultimately middle-class families. So this budget, which increases home building taxes, risks 100,000 home building jobs, according to the people who actually build homes. I have here a quote from Fitch Budget. Fitch, the credit rating agency, and they say that this deficit, which Mark Carney has doubled, will now threaten our credit rating. Let me just bring in the chair of our shadow cabinet economic affairs subcommittee, small businessman and member of parliament, Pat Kelly.
Well, thank you, Pierre. This budget does nothing to deal with the cost of living crisis that Canadians are enduring right now, because it just piles on more debt that fuels the inflation that is driving up the cost of living. At $78.3 billion, this is nearly double the deficit that less than a year ago was considered to be so high that it precipitated a crisis in the resignation of the last finance minister. So what was an unthinkably high deficit less than a year ago, the new prime minister has nearly doubled. And this is just going to drive up the cost of living, driving up inflation. We had expert testimony at the Finance Committee last week that talked about the break glass emergency of productivity in Canada. And low productivity means higher cost of living. It means that people cannot, their paychecks are not keeping up with the higher cost of living. Canada's productivity is at the bottom of the OECD. Our per capita GDP over the 10-year period of this government has not increased. We are at the bottom of the OECD and the G7 for per capita GDP over this time period. And there's no relief for, there's no solution for the productivity crisis in this budget. There are no meaningful fiscal anchors because this government breaks every fiscal anchor that it ever assigns to itself. So this budget is not a solution, and Conservatives like Pierre Poilievre have been sounding the alarm bell for years on this.
Thank you, Pat. And again, if you don't believe Pat and I, then you'll believe Fitch, which said Canada's proposed budget announced in Parliament November 4th underscores the erosion of the federal government's finances, while Canada's rating is broadly stable. Persistent fiscal expansion and a rising debt burden have weakened its credit profile and could increase rating pressure over the medium term. The budget expands the forecast federal deficit to $78.3 billion, general government deficits of 3.3% of GDP, which is higher than the AA median of 2.3 and substantially higher than Canada's pre-pandemic deficits, which averaged 0.4 in the prior decades. And finally, it says that combined with the sizable non-budgetary financing needs, the higher deficit will substantially increase general government debt, which is forecast to be 92% of GDP in 2025, up from 88.6 in 2024, before accelerating to 98.5% by 2027, nearly double the forecast AA medium of 49.6. Now, those are a lot of numbers, but let's cut right down to it. To be a AA rated country, on average, your debt to GDP is 49.6%. Carney's on track to bring ours to nearly 100%. In other words, our debt as a share of GDP will be almost twice the size of the average AA country. That's the kind of fiscal mess that Mark Carney and the Liberals are creating. So much for he's gone from promising to be a brilliant economist to being the most costly, reckless, and risky prime minister in Canadian history, and that is why Conservatives will oppose it. But we not only oppose, we propose. Our proposal is to cut bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, corporate welfare, handouts to phony refugees, and other wasted money so we can bring down debt, taxes, and inflation. We would get rid of the industrial carbon tax to unlock the industrial engine of our nation and to reduce the price of everything made with steel, aluminum, cement, concrete, glass. That is everything that we buy. We will cap government spending for a dollar for dollar law, requiring we find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending. We'll make this the fastest place on earth to get a building permit, repeal the anti-energy laws, use the powers in C5 to rapidly approve a pipeline to the Pacific so we can get 1 million barrels of oil to Asia every single day. We will get rid of the capital gains tax on anyone who reinvests their money in Canada to bring home the $500 billion of net investment that Mark Carney and the Liberals have sent fleeing to the United States of America. We will cut income tax so hard work pays off. We will get rid of all home building taxes, not only to provide affordable homes to the next generation, but also to bring back the 100,000 trades jobs so carpenters can swing hammers, framers can frame homes, loggers can harvest lumber, and we can build a tariff-proof industry back to life in this country. That is how we restore the promise that I enjoyed as a young Calgary kid, delivering the sun door to door in my adolescence. Is how we're going to give every single kid in this country the opportunity that we had. We're going to have opportunity and freedom for our youth, home ownership for our families, and of course, security for our wonderful seniors. That is our vision, our hopeful future, and now let's get it done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now questions from the floor.
Hi, Matthew Skase, Globe and Mail. You've yet to address last week's floor crossing and departure from caucus. Chris d'Entremont said your leadership is why he crossed the floor. How do you respond to comments that your caucus is not united right now?
Well, first of all, I just quote Mr. d'Entremont, who said, and I quote, "Since I first elected here in 2019, the cost of living has skyrocketed. Even then, families in Nova Scotia, as it is now, as it was called at the time back, but is now Acadie and Annapolis, we're struggling. We warned that the Liberals out-of-control spending and massive deficits were irresponsible, but of course they did not listen. Now, after 6 months under the new Prime Minister Mark Carney, who promised fiscal discipline, Canadians are still waiting." He said, Mr. Carney said, I'm quoting Mr. d'Entremont here, Mr. Carney said he would be judged by the cost at the grocery store. Well, Canadians are judging him, and they are not impressed. Since the Liberals came to power, food prices have risen 40%, said Mr. d'Entremont. We have heard it many times here today. It is deliberate, and it is unacceptable. It is inhumane for a G7 country, said Mr. d'Entremont of Liberal policies. He said, we are a rich country. We are a food basket of a country. We can produce all the food for many people in the world, and we can barely feed ourselves for some reason, end quote. That is how Mr. d'Entremont described the outrageous cost of living as the direct result of Mark Carney's Liberals. I'm very saddened for the Nova Scotia families on whom Mr. Carney and Mr. d'Entremont are raising the price of groceries and homes, but that will not change our resolve to continue to fight for an affordable Canada, affordable budgets, and an affordable future. Thank you.
Et en français.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais juste citer, malheureusement, j'ai juste ces commentaires en français, mais M. D'Entremont a souligné qu'après 6 mois de Mark Carney, les libéraux ont brisé leurs promesses de discipline financière. Ils ont augmenté le coût de l'épicerie, que M. Carney, malgré ses promesses d'être jugé par le prix des épiceries, les Canadiens sont en attente pour la nourriture abordable et que le prix de nourriture a augmenté de 40% depuis l'arrivée au pouvoir. Malheureusement, à cause de M. Carney et M. D'Entremont, les familles de Nouvelle-Écosse vont devoir payer plus pour leurs épiceries et pour les maisons. Malgré ces promesses brisées, nous, les conservateurs, allons continuer de travailler pour un pays abordable, un budget abordable et une vie abordable pour tous les Canadiens.
Rick Bell.
I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people? And I said, don't give me too much credit. I had good raw material. I guess I saw, there was a certain smugness. You may have heard the old saying, you can always tell a Harvard man, but you can't tell him much. And I remember a few times I'd run into those people, and I would sometimes argue with him, get him out on a limb, and I argue and then cut the limb off. And I remember my same roommate who had laughed at me was saying, did you really have to make a fool of him in front of all those people?